the definition of hemp and how ludicrous it's turned out to be. It also involves execution of search warrants and how do you handle property you've seized and things like that. But we're going to go to Tennessee. We have a complaint that just got filed by 5 retail stores that sold tobacco and hemp products, and a wholesaler who apparently was involved with all these, and I think they're all interrelated companies. And the complaint goes to the history of the hemp bill and what Tennessee did with hemp-derived cannabinoids. Okay, and this is the term they use, and you know they keep coming up with new words for all this shit, and it's hard to keep up with. But it turns out that the metric they use is the 0.3% THC, Delta 9 THC, and that's hemp. They had subsequent hearings on the hemp bill out of Tennessee. They identified all these different cannabinoids, which includes THCA and Delta 8 and Delta 10, and you know all sorts of them. But they still left the metric at 0.3% THC, Delta 9 THC. And this has been a problem for me since Raphael Mechoulam found THC, I think in 1963. They haven't really changed their understanding of what this plant produces in intoxicating cannabinoids. Oh, if I'm reading between the tea leaves here, these companies were selling hemp flower with 0.3% THC or less, but it had a shitload of THCA in it. And for those who don't understand this, THC is the precursor to Delta 9 THC. It's an acid, which means it has a CO and an OH group, and naturally the CO goes off. It's called decarboxylation, and now you have Delta 9. Okay? So they were using this definition of it's got to be 0.3% or less of Delta 9 THC, and sort of ignoring that THCA is the precursor. As soon as you heat it up in a bowl and smoke it, it turns into THC. Oh, that's the game that's being played here. And it seems that a DA, police chief, and some other high-ranking law enforcement officials got search warrants for these 5 retail stores. Not the wholesale company, but the 5 retail stores. And the complaint says they didn't say anything about hemp in these warrants. Okay, so the cops show up at these retail stores, and someone makes a decision. I think it was the DA that was there on site, that these warrants cover these hemp products. And it seems that they had some testing strips or some portable testing equipment that could test positive for THC, but didn't differentiate between THCA and THC. And it couldn't tell you the levels of THC, which is required for hemp versus marijuana. And it seems like we have the Keystone cops here on the ground executing a search warrant against a company that doesn't have anything to do with hemp in the warrant. And that's where it starts to get even more interesting, because when it comes to a warrant, you can go to the places listed in the warrant and you can seize the things listed in the warrant. And then if you view illegal conduct from a lawful vantage point while you're executing a search warrant, you can then go investigate that and potentially seize it if you determine that it's illegal. And that's where the pissing match starts, because these cops had some portable device that they claim, oh, this is positive for THC, we're going to take all your hemp. They then went to the wholesale place, which was in a different location, had a door between it, which was locked. They went in there and decided they had huge safes full of flour, hemp flour, which I'm assuming were heavy with THCA, but had enough THC, Delta 9, to qualify them as hemp. And the DA decided, if you don't open those safes up, the fire department's coming, we're going to bust them open and take all your shit. So they opened it up. They complained, we got COAs here. It's less than 3% THC, blah, 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 blah. The DA didn't care. They took over $1 million worth of hemp flour, or what I'm going to say is heavy THCA hemp flour, which is basically weed. Let's stop playing games here. Okay. Now, this happened on May 9th, and very rapidly they went and filed this complaint and said, hey, we need an injunction to stop this, because what they understand is if you store THCA for any length of time, unless it's very cold and no UV light, it decomposes into delta 9. So it's not going to take long before this is not hemp anymore, and it's weed, and they know that the clock is ticking. So they want the court to step in and issue an order that if you don't give it back to us, we want you to store it properly, or they know it's going to turn into delta 9 THC and be an illegal product. So now we have the big issues in this. What's the definition of hemp versus marijuana, which is unclear? If you have a search warrant and what you seize is not on the warrant, then it's per se unconstitutional unless you can show exigent circumstances. And these buildings weren't going anywhere. The cops were there. They could have reapplied for a warrant from a judge or amendment to the warrant to take stuff if they wanted to, which they didn't want to. You can't test for THC levels on the scene with the portable equipment they had, so there's got to be more done to be able to determine is this legal or non-legal. And then what obligations does the government have when they take your shit to store it so they don't ruin it? And all these are going to be part of this case going forward, and we'll follow it. But this may be one of those cases where we have to face the ugly truth that the definitions for hemp are stupid. And they need to revisit them because there's so many loopholes here that the rule really doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So that's my story for them. Throw it back at you guys. What do y'all think about this? And it's Delta 8 too, Stone. So there's that one out there.
So here's the question. Here's the question, because we all know that THCA, if left in high heat areas, like you leave it in a hot car, that can cause the THC levels to rise, so that it would not meet the muster of the Farm Bill. Do you think that they are trying to set these guys up by holding on to some evidence and then testing it maybe a day or two later, and so it would show a higher result? Dale?
I don't think they're that sophisticated.
I do.
Yeah, I was going to say, Elise, I've represented a lot of cops before, and organic chemistry was not on their list of classes that they were required to take.
Yeah, they're about to get lucky. They're about to get lucky with this move, and just it's going to turn into what they thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
But they have COAs for all the product. So if the COA says before you took it, it was at less than 0.3, now the cops have a problem. No one got charged with a crime here. That's what's unusual. There was no forfeiture action. No one got charged with a crime.
So
here.
Then it was just a robbery. It's just a robbery then, right, Dale?
Yeah, that's what the sovereign citizens say. It don't work very well.
Yeah, that's
what
I would say.
They had a warrant. They had a warrant. That warrant may be deficient,
traveling,
and all that kind of stuff. And I think they're going to be paying a lot of money for this. But
Dale, in this, did they when you get raided by law enforcement, they have to leave a receipt of everything that they took. Do you know if this was a detailed receipt? Because I know a lot of the times I've had receipts, it'll just say green leafy substance. They won't quantify any weights or anything. Do you know if that was done in this situation?
The complaint says it was a vague list. Now, they had the inventory. They knew exactly what they took because it had been inventoried. They had COAs for everything. So the owners of these businesses know, but what they got back from the warrant was vague. And one of these warrants, the cops wouldn't execute against hemp because they said hemp's not on the warrant. We're not going to take your hemp. So it just gets more confusing as you look at the Keystone Cop routine here that went on.
Mm-hmm. So now, Dale, would the people have a lawsuit against law enforcement if they did hold on to this stuff too long and it did get hot and it did all of a sudden start to test hot and prior to it tested fine? Would the people just in general be able to file a lawsuit against the police department for that?
Well, you can file a lawsuit for anything. The problem is, how do you prevail? And that's one of the issues here, is that what obligation does the government have when they seize your property to protect it? Okay. And I've written in contracts here in California that if you take my weed as a distributor and you don't take care of it properly and it decomposes and has problems, the obligation's on the distributor. There's no such obligations on the cops. They took my weed and 4 or 5 years later drug it out in a plastic bag and said, here's your weed. Well, thank God I didn't want to smoke it anymore because you kind of ruined it. And they don't care. They'll throw it into a room with the lights on and it's 85 degrees in there and accelerate.
Let me ask you this. In this case, since they have the COAs, can they use that then to be like, when this does convert to Delta 9, can they be like, that's not what you took from my place? I don't know where you got that. My COA says this is what you took from my place, and that's not what that is.
That's going to be hard to prove.
I suspect that these cases tend to get settled quietly, okay? Because the cops, I mean, they get sued for 1983 actions and under color of authority, you do all these kind of things to people. And it turns out that in the final analysis, the cop got both feet on their wang, and someone steps in to go, okay, let's settle this and let's get some NDAs and this and confidential agreements, and we'll get it to go away because we don't want any precedent set here. That's what I expect will happen. But it's going to be publicly in the courts, and I want to see what the cops have to say to defend themselves. Do they think they have any obligation to protect someone's valuable, spoilable product when you take it without a warrant?
I agree, and I agree with Isaac Cruz in this. He says it's a robbery by land pirates, you guys.
Smash and grab.
Exactly, smash and grab.